But after the Pat Tillman story, after the Benghazi story, I don't have great hope that they'll surprise me with any answers. And but what I do have hope in is the American people. And so that's why we wrote the book. That's why we go around talking. That's why we beg you to buy it and share your copies. And when I said he has the copyright, I say that because if you want to take photos of every page in it and post them on your social media, we don't care. Do it. The important thing is that it can save lives, and we're getting word. And on your social media, please share. Because see, you don't really have to change the rules of engagement here, which is what Billy's going to talk to you a lot about. You don't really have to change those to enact some change. What you have to do is convince our men and women over there in Afghanistan that we've got their dang backs if something goes wrong, which we don't, but we're working toward it. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is just educating people about what's going on. So I'm going to turn it over to him. I've talked long enough, but thank you guys for allowing us to be here.
I know everybody's interested in asking questions. We're going to ask that you hold all your questions until Billy's finished, and they'll take as many questions as you have to, okay? Thank you.
Thank you all for having us here. Ag for America in New Hampshire. We're thankful and glad to be here, but wish we were somewhere else, I'll tell you. September 11, 2001 was a date that changed lives for thousands and thousands of Americans, and has continued to change lives of families for thousands and thousands and thousands of Americans since then. And it could have been avoided. It could have been avoided. Our government knew. We failed to act, as we still fail to act today. And September 11, 2001 was not the beginning of the next jihad, but it was a marker in how far it has progressed in the world today and on American soil. On December 6, 1941, the United States of America was not engaged against the Empire of Japan. But the Empire of Japan was fully engaged against the United States of America. And today, as America retreats around the world, as we refuse, and I know I'm talking to the choir here, but as we refuse to acknowledge this enemy, as we continue to appease them, as we continue to submit, as we continue to give them rights that Americans don't have, they are fully engaged, and they are marching forward, and they are marching forward around the world and on our own soil. Today, the Muslim Brotherhood is active in the White House and active in our own government, and they are softening the battlefield because the Muslim Brotherhood is the father organization or the umbrella organization for all these, for the Haqqani, for the Taliban, for Al-Qaeda, Abu Sayyaf, no matter what name you put on it, they all come from the Muslim Brotherhood. They are the original. The Muslim Brotherhood is just has a little bit different plan, and after they have decided, or something causes them to think they can fight here in America, they will go kinetic against us here in this country, folks. And we must stay engaged. And we must have the backs of our defenders overseas, and we must be alert here at home. As Karen told you, August 6, 2011, it's a day we won't ever forget. It was the day that we, and if any of you have ever experienced a loss like this, and I know there's at least one here who has, but it's the day that Karen and I and our family began to live the rest of our lives. And I can tell you right now and especially you guys who have served in the military out there, it's very humbling to stand in front of you and talk to you about our military, because I'm not a military expert. I am not. Karen and I have learned the things that we've learned because of what has happened. And so thank you for your service. And so please give me a little leeway today if I use the wrong terminology somewhere, or if I say the wrong thing. I ask that you not throw anything at me and give me a little grace. And if you must scold me, wait to do it in private, okay? But shortly after Aaron died, the greatest loss in the history of naval special warfare. Now, when I tell you that, and the greatest one-day loss in our country's war against Islamic jihadists, okay? For our military. And as I tell you that, I want you to think about how much that our government and senior military leadership has allowed our military warfighters to be compromised. Because SEAL Team 6 is, we have many great warfighters, but our Tier 1 fighters are Delta Force and SEAL Team 6, okay? SEAL Team 6, the most elite assault force the world has ever seen. Compromised to the point, and I don't like to say this because my son was a member of that team, but compromised to the point that the greatest loss in the history of naval special warfare was accomplished by an Afghan farmer. That's how far we have compromised our warfighters. That's only one example, but it is a good one to use. And Karen and I have learned that family after family who has ended up in this situation that we're in have talked to us and told us about the way that their son died. And you can't believe how many stories there are where, because of the rules of engagement, because they were not allowed to engage, because they were denied to fire back at the enemy, resulting in or because they were unarmed on an American base, resulting in the death of their loved ones. Now, this is what I believe about American citizens. Yes, we knew that our son could die, but I always thought, if it could happen, it would be in a firefight. It would be with bullets raging, everything being done that could be done to win a battle or keep our warfighters alive. And it happened. What we learned that night, what we learned took place that night, I'll tell you, it was a setup. Now, before you go way out there, that's not what I'm talking about. Do I think this government is capable? Do I think President Barack Obama is capable of anything? Yes, I do. But I have no proof. And so we don't talk about that. The facts are bad enough. And as I tell you that, y'all don't know me, I don't know y'all. I'll tell you what you do. The things that I tell you today are the truth. I promise you that. But you make sure you test them. It won't take you long to go on the internet and begin to find the things that are going on with our warfighters in Afghanistan, if you don't already know. But I said it was a setup. And what I mean by that, a systematic ABC 1, 2, 3 method of operating in Afghanistan, that what the military calls a 1 in a million shot, I tell you, it was a calamity that could not keep from happening at some time or another. And as Karen told you, we have been notified there will be a hearing this next Thursday in D.C., and Lord willing, we will be there. But I've already been told one of the biggest questions we have, and I'm going to get a little bit out of step here, but one of the biggest questions we have is who were the 7 Afghans on that chopper that night? Yes. We've already been told. I was told the day before yesterday on an hour-long conversation with our contact inside the Oversight Committee. That won't be answered. It's the simplest thing in the world to answer. But that will not be answered. The military has classified that answer. So that won't come out. I've already been told, Mr. Bond, I can tell you right now, you're going to leave that hearing frustrated, and rightly so. Now that's where we are. In September of 2011, and by the way, I expect no more. I'm sorry to say it, but I expect no more. They run roughshod over the American people. And it almost, with the exception of a few, it doesn't make any difference which side of the aisle they're on. And today, what we're talking to you about is not a left or right issue. It's an American issue. It is an American issue because both sides raise sons and daughters who love this country more and go off to fight because they love our republic more than they hate the enemy that's in front of them. And we are one of the few countries in the world where that still exists. But I can tell you today, in a time when more servicemen are committing suicide than ever before, at a time today when it takes a madman like Malik Hassan years to be brought to trial, and where we can have an American warfighter commit a so-called crime in Afghanistan, it takes but a few months for him to be brought to trial. And I'll tell you something, folks, that's not right. That is not right. In September of 2011, a short month or so, almost exactly a month after the shoot down of Extortion 17, I was able to go into Dev Group to SEAL Team 6 base there at Dam Neck and speak with the commander of SEAL Team 6. And we knew, or we had heard immediately after the shoot down, that they were flying on a CH-47D Chinook National Guard helicopter. And it doesn't take a military expert to know that this is not the way that the Navy SEALs, the Army Rangers, especially SEAL Team 6, usually operates. When I went in there, that's one of the first questions I asked him, and I said, were they really flying on a National Guard helicopter? And he said, yeah, Billy, they were. Well, why, Commander? Well, because we don't have enough of the MH-47s. And for you who don't know, there's a CH-47 Chinook. There's an MH-47 Chinook, the souped-up special operations flown by the 160th Aviation. Both of them twin rotors. So, because one of the first stories that we got at the debriefing was, well, we had to have a twin rotor chopper because the Black Hawks couldn't get the lift there in the altitude in the mountains of Afghanistan. Well, we do. We've got a twin rotor special operations chopper. It's an MH-47, but we don't have enough. So that night they were using a twin rotor chopper built in the 1960s. But anyway, I'm getting terribly out of kilter here. But I went in there and he said, yeah, Billy, they were. Well, why not? Why were they? Well, we don't have enough of the MH-47s. Well, why not? Because America is not engaged in, the country is not engaged in this war. And folks, that's true. It is true. How many of you know that just last week we lost two more American special operators in a green-on-blue attack, an insider attack, what they prefer to call it now, but in a green-on-blue, where the Allies killed the Americans, you know, that they're sitting down to have dinner with or tea with or whatever. Because the news doesn't report it. When Bush was president, and I'm not defending President Bush, but when he was president, every time a body bag was unloaded at Dover, every time a coffin came from Dover, the news reported it. Today, you don't hear about it. America is not engaged in this war because our president, and even our Congress, our administration, the Department of Defense, James Clapper, one organization, one department after another tells us that America is safe. And they're lying to us. They tell us we don't have an enemy. They tell us the Islamists are not dangerous. But he went ahead and said, I said, Captain, would the same thing have happened if they'd been on an MH-47? He said, Billy, we'll never know. He said, what I can tell you is this. He said, if we'd been on an MH-47, special ops chopper, it would have come in fast. It would have come in hot. It would have come in at a different angle. And it would have had different pilots. But we'll never know. And then he made this statement. Just because you get away with doing something wrong 1,000 times doesn't make it right. Now, the military knows they're operating wrong. The men on the ground know it, but they can't speak up about it. Your senior military leaders know it, but they know to keep their jobs and to get their promotions and to keep their pensions and to keep on and get their cushy things when they get out. They've got to go along with the Obama administration. They know that. So it will cost them something to speak up. Since Obama became president, it's been an average of 1 every 8 days. Senior military leader either be fired or forced to retire. In October of 2011, the families were brought in to Little Creek Base to be given a debriefing of what had taken place the night that Extortion 17, call sign of the chopper, Operation Lefty Grove, name of the mission, took place. And we were immediately told that they were flying on the CH-47D Chinook. Now let me tell you, before you get too carried away with the D, it was a C first. It was a C model, CH-47C, National Guard helicopter, built in 1969, retrofitted to a D model in 1985, I believe, in the 1980s, built before these men were born, retrofitted before a lot of them were born, and at least while they were all standing on the screen up here, while they were little boys. Not built as an assault chopper. If you look on the Boeing website, you'll see, and you military men know, the CH-47 is a cargo hauling chopper that at best transports troops from one base to another. Not flying into the night, into the middle of the night in a hot landing zone. We were told that. And I asked the question, the general was right in front of us, well, why were they flying on that chopper? Well, because we don't have enough of the MH-40. Because I asked him, I said, why were they not flying on an MH-47? Because we don't have enough because of the stepped-up missions in Afghanistan. We were also told that when that chopper was shot down, the United States had an AC-130 Spectre gunship and 2 A-64 Apache helicopters in the air watching the off. The Rangers were already engaged there and had been engaged for some 3.5 hours. 2 of those 3 aircraft saw where the RPGs were fired from. But the men who fired the RPGs that night walked away. Why? According to the general standing in front of us, because there might be friendlies in the building below where the RPGs were fired from, and the rules of engagement wouldn't allow it. Now, I left there that day puzzled over those 2 things, wrong chopper and about the RPGs. 30 Americans lay on the ground, dead. Most of them, including our son, lay inside that chopper burning for hours before what was left of them could be removed from the chopper. But we didn't want to be too aggressive to the enemy. I left there that day and I began to call congressmen, and I had contact with Congressman Allen West, Congressman Tom Rooney, Congressman Steve Fincher, and told them those 2 things, and you know, they expressed concern. This was, and by now we've moved into November, and Congressman Rooney, his staff called me one day and said there's going to be a high-level classified meeting in D.C. with senior military officials. We're going to address those 2 questions you have. Right before Christmas in 2011, I received a handwritten letter from Congressman Rooney. It's in the book, a copy of the letter, where he does not address the wrong chopper. He does address about the ROE. But what he says about it is, he says, what I found out from the senior military leaders, it was not because of the ROE. It was because our air weapons team didn't know where the shots came from. I knew it was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I had not only heard it from the general, because when the debriefing went on, they showed us the last 20 seconds or so live feed from one of the air weapons aircraft of the chopper as it burned and as it exploded, and it had already exploded, and as it burned with one rotor system going this way, one rotor system going this way, still spinning, and the chopper burning. So we saw that. Because when we saw that, after the debriefing was over, I asked if I could see it again. And a lot of the other parents wanted to see it again. They took us down to a little room and showed those of us. Well, the man who took us down was not the general, but I did ask him again, why did we not take him out? He gave me the same story that I told you, and the rules of engagement. I asked him the second time. He answered it again. She hit me in the side and said, don't ask him again. The man's already answered your question. But I had that answer from 2 different people 3 times. So I knew it was a lie. Either they were lying that day, or the military was lying in Washington, D.C. So I let the letter lay there through Christmas till after the first of the year. And then I thought, it dawned on me to call SOCOM and talk to the man who had showed us the video. I had his phone number. I called him, and I asked him to describe again what happened that night. He described it in more detail this time and talked about the tower over the building and went through the same scenario. I didn't tell him that I'd heard any different story, and ended up with the rules of engagement wouldn't let us take him out. I hung up the phone. Sometime later that day, I called the Admiral over Naval Special Warfare, Admiral Sean Pybus, who had been in the debriefing, sat right in front of Karen and I. And I asked him, why would some senior military official in Washington, D.C. say such a thing? Billy, I don't know. You heard the same thing I heard. Well, I didn't know why they'd lie about it either. I thought those 2 things were terrible, ridiculous, but I didn't think we'd be where we are today. But what happened is on the day we left, they gave us an overview, a folder with an overview of what they talked about that day, and in there was a little DVD. And I put that DVD in the computer, and it overwhelmed me with how much information was on there. And I say that because yesterday on the way up here, Karen watched on the plane the Pat Tillman story with the information they received and everything, and she told me that one of the parents made the statement, they sent us so much information that it overwhelmed us. And they thought it was a plan. I had never thought that before. But it was, I printed it out, and it was over 1,300 pages of military investigation. Another 200 to 250 pages totally blacked out. The 1,300 pages, much of it redacted, much of it blacked out. But in it, enough damning information that me, not being a military expert, couldn't believe and knew this is no way to run a war if you want to win and you want Americans to come home alive. When Aaron came home in 2010 from Afghanistan, one of the things that he told me is his dad, at that time, they were taking the Afghan commandos with them on the missions. By the way, don't think they want to. Our guys don't want to carry the Afghans with them. Our government is making them carry them with them because our guys are too rough on the Afghans. And they're there to keep an eye and take a lead in the operations. But one after another has talked to us about operating with the Afghans. But he told me, he said, Dad, when we go out on an op, we don't tell them where we're going until we get there. Because if we do, the enemy knows. Dad, a lot of times when we get out, when we get to fight, they won't fight with us because they know the enemy. And Dad, they're always loyal to the highest bidder. Fast forward to 2011, when after Aaron's gone, and I'm reading this, on or about page 7, very early on, when they're explaining, the military leaders in Afghanistan are explaining to Colt and his staff, his investigators, how they operate. They say, we operate in Afghanistan now, we operate in Afghanistan with what's called the OCG, Operational Coordination Group of Afghanistan. They're comprised of the Afghan National Army, the Afghan National Police, and the Afghan Security Ministry. These people have eyes on every special operations mission that takes place. They have the intel, they're in on the pre-op, they're in on the post-op, they can see the op taking place, they know the flight routes, they know who they're going after, they have the authority to squash the op. So, in theory, we have lent our special operations force. You, the American citizen, who love and adore these special operators and respect them and wouldn't want to see one of them injured for anything, don't know what our men are up to. But in theory, we have lent them out to the Islamic Republic, Sharia compliant Afghanistan, the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. I'll tell you, that's criminal. Now, if that's not bad enough, this group, the OCG, is not vetted by the American military or by the American government through an agreement of the Obama administration with Karzai. So we learned that right off. Also learned that on board that chopper that night, there were 7 Afghans, and they were not the same men who were listed on the flight manifest. Now, we don't know who those 7 Afghans are, but I can tell you right now that we already have more information. We have more information than they are going to let out in the hearing. Because in January of 2013, 4-star Admiral McCraven came to our house with a senior enlisted advisor and 2 security personnel who stayed outside. Senior enlisted advisor, a Delta Force guy, was with him and sat at the table with us as they talked to us. We thought, and I guess they would say that's what their visit was about, to answer any questions that we had about what happened that night with Extortion 17. Now, what I can tell you is Admiral McCraven couldn't stay off praising President Obama long enough to explain to us what happened with Extortion 17. At least 4 times he went back. First he came in the house and he was a gentleman. But he said, now this is not political, but at least 4 times he went back to brought up the subject of President Barack Obama and began to talk about it. Up to the last time when I finally said, sir, I'm going to have to ask you not to mention that man's name again in my house. And but what he did, and you know, it was so unprofessional. That's the highest ranking anybody that's ever been in our home. And we expected more professionalism. It was so unprofessional. He brought it up, believe it or not, about, well, President Obama got us out of Iraq. And I said, yes, sir, but at what cost? Now, this is well over a year ago. We certainly weren't as bad there as it is now. But I said, at what cost, sir? I said, well, no, first he said, well, he's getting us out of Afghanistan. And I said, sir, at what cost? I said, I'm afraid we're not going to win that war. Now, two months earlier in November, he and I had a confrontation at the SEAL Museum where I had said to him, I'm afraid we're not going to win the war. And he had said to me harshly, we're winning the war and we're going to win the war in Afghanistan. But 2 months later in my home, he said, I don't know if we're going to win the war or not. I had made the statement, I'm afraid my son's life's going to be wasted. And he said, well, President Obama is getting us out of Afghanistan. And I said, at what cost, sir? At what cost? He said, well, he did get us out of Iraq. And I said, again, sir, at what cost? I said, now, Iran is trafficking weapons across Iraq to Syria, threatening our greatest ally, Israel. You know what his response was? Well, Bush got us into that war. I mean, you would have thought it was Alan Combs or somebody, you know, on Fox News. And that was all he could come back with. That was all he could come back with. I'll tell you another response he got. Let me tell you this. At the first part of the meeting, and I don't want to talk about that meeting too much, and I know I don't have much time to talk, but first part of the meeting, he said, I just want you to know the military will never mislead the loved ones, someone who's lost a loved one. And Karen's sitting there about as relaxed as she can be. And she just says, very relaxed, well, what about Pat Tillman? He almost comes completely out of his seat. He comes over the seat, onto the table, and screams, what about Pat Tillman? It was just a case of friendly fire. Now, there's 3 other of us sitting there at the table. And we sat there with our mouths up because how do you respond? We knew it was a case of friendly fire, but the military lied about it for 3 years. For 3, it was just dead silence in the room because nobody knew what to say next. Let me go back to the 7 Afghans. We thought it was no big deal about the 7 Afghans because that was all it said in the 1,300 pages. They were not who they were supposed to be on the manifest. So I brought it up. And remember, I told you, I feel that we got more information than we will get at the congressional hearing. Because I said that, and I said, must not have been a big deal. McCraven sat there, Admiral McCraven sat there stone-faced. Didn't say a word, but his senior enlisted advisor said, Mr. Vaughn, it was a very big deal. That should have never happened. We didn't know what to say. He went on and said, in fact, after the shoot-down, the families of the people who were supposed to be on the chopper had to be re-notified and say that their loved one was okay. And Mr. Vaughn, I want you to know, the rest of your team's, the rest of your son's team was very upset because an Afghan was allowed to speak at the ramp ceremony in Afghanistan. And by the way, have y'all, and went ahead and said, a commander at the last minute swapped out the 7 Afghans. We sat there because he just dropped one sentence after another. After each one, a small pause to see if we'd respond. We didn't know what to come, had nothing to come back with. And finally he says, by the way, have y'all gotten y'all's copy of the ramp ceremony? Now the ramp ceremony, for you who may not know, is the ceremony they have in Afghanistan before they load the bodies onto the plane to fly them back to Dover. No, we hadn't, sir. We don't know anybody who has. I'll get you a copy. And as time went by, we didn't get it. We were supposed to mail it, and Karen emailed him, and he emailed back. It's been a lot bigger problem, more bureaucracy and red tape to get the ramp ceremony than I thought. I'll send you mine. And he did. And I wasn't intending to go there, but I'll finish with this. As we watched that ceremony, weeks later, we let it lay there for a while because we didn't look forward to watching it. And as we put it in on Saturday morning and watched it, it was an honorable ceremony. An American chaplain came on and prayed a generic prayer. Romans 8:28, if you know the verse where it talks about Jesus Christ, he left out the Jesus Christ. Of course, but as soon as he was finished, an imam came on and began to chant. And we looked at each other almost at the same time and said, we've got to find out what he was saying. Well, Karen, being who she is, she's pretty tech savvy, and she pulled just the audio of the imam off. No video, nothing else in the ceremony, because we did not want a biased translation for anybody to know what was going on. We sent it to a friend. We sent it to John Trinko, who got it to a Mideast military expert, retired, who called me back the next day and explained to me that it said that the Muslims are the winners, damn the infidels to hellfire, and call them fodder for hellfire. And so, now the Department of Defense has made a statement on that. And they've said the translation is not correct. But they've not offered a translation. That's all they've said, is they've said the translation is not correct. And by the way, they've also made another statement. After our press conference, when one of us parents said something about the mission, and in the book you'll see that in the testimony, somebody says in over 400 missions we've done in Afghanistan, we've never done one like this. Another statement goes ahead and says, you might find one out there somewhere that was... No, you can't. You can't find it, because he cut his own self off in the testimony. But the Department of Defense says to the Washington Times, this mission was like all others in Afghanistan. The translation is not correct. But Glenn Beck's staff, Louis Gohmert's staff, Michelle Bachman's staff, Larry Clayman's staff, and Steve Coughlin have all translated it and come back with exactly the same translation that the person who translated it for us did. The 7 Afghans, I called, so after that day, for 2 weeks, when they left, I thought, why in the world didn't I ask who the commander was? Finally it dawned on me, and I called SOCOM. talked to the same guy who I told you a while ago that who had talked to me about the rules of engagement. I said, Colonel Grant, I said, they visited our house, a few weeks ago, and I told the story. I won't tell it to y'all again, but what the senior enlisted advisor had said. And I said, sir, could you tell me who that commander was who changed out the 7 Afghans at the last minute? He said, Mr. Vaughn, I'm puzzled by that. We on the investigating team weren't told that happened. So what we found is one question that leads to another. Now we know it's suspicious. We know that they could settle this. They could give the answer. There could be a simple answer, but why are they holding it back? But I've already been told, I was told the day before yesterday, because that's been one of my questions, that question will not be answered. We found out that night as I read through there, when that chopper went in, 3.5-hour firefight going on with Rangers and Taliban. There was no pre-assault fire for the CH-47D. C remodeled to a D Chinook as it went in. It landed like it was going into the Walmart parking lot. Why? Because it's aggressive. At the debriefing that the parents were at, one of the fathers asked, why was there not a drone strike used that night? I'm not saying whether they should or shouldn't have, but a three-star admiral, Admiral Robert Harwood, turned and said to the grieving parents and spouses there, because we want to win their hearts and minds. Navy SEALs are not trained to win hearts and minds. And I'll tell you, when Navy SEALs and Army Rangers and Special Operators are given a mission to win hearts and minds, it gets them killed. When they're not allowed to defeat the enemy, it gets them unnecessarily sacrificed. We learned that as the chopper was coming in, that at least 3 groups of insurgents were gathering in the area where the chopper was going to land. Here again, it should not come as a surprise when they know everything that's going on. And as early as 2009, our ambassador to Afghanistan said that we believe that as much as 25% of the Afghan National Army is infiltrated with the Taliban. We know that the OCG is infiltrated with the Pakistani secret police. We know that. We know that the Haqqani network that operates in Afghanistan is a Pakistani terror network, according to our military, the most lethal. And we also know that the man who was killed before, the man they were going after that night, was a Pakistani. Now the internet says the man that the SEALs were going after that night was a Pakistani. We don't know. The military says he was Taliban. Now, as a close, just let me tell you a couple things real quick. Today, our warfighters in Afghanistan are facing some of the most cruel rules of engagement that our military has ever seen. And the rules of engagement, by the way, are not laws at all. They are rules handed down by the Commander-in-Chief, enforced by the Uniform Code of Military Justice system, which I say is not a justice system at all. It's a penal system set up to punish American warfighters when they don't carry out the agenda of the administration. And the rules of engagement can change so fast that there's no way a warfighter can keep up with them. In fact, they can change, and you guys know more about this, you guys, military guys, than I do, but they can change even in the middle of an op. Even the night that Extortion 17 was shot down, there was no pre-assault fire when it went in, but later that night when the recovery crew went in to get the Americans' bodies, pre-assault fire was allowed. Now what we're doing is we're making our warfighters so uncertain as to what they can do that even if it causes a fraction of a second of hesitation, it can cost them their life. When I told you a while ago, Aaron would talk to me, about things that went on ops, and we're a Christian family, and what they need, what the Islamists need is Jesus. That's what they need. And so, it would go through my mind sometimes when he would tell me some things, is there anything else? Was there something else that maybe could have been done in this situation? But you know what? It never went from here to here. You know why? Because I never, ever would put one speck of hesitation in my son's mind or his heart when he was out on an op. Never. To have him go out on an op and think, because he could, well, Dad said, and it cost him his life. But I'll tell you one thing, our government, our senior military leadership, our JAG system is doing that over and over and over again. And today, when that man or that woman signs their name on that dotted line and gives up their right to the Constitution that they're willing to volunteer and go fight and preserve, if they go out on the battlefield and instead of killing that terrorist, he's taken prisoner, he gets the protection of that Constitution. And he gets an attorney. And you know who pays for that attorney? The American taxpayer. And the families who are sacrificing their loved ones over there. I'll tell you today, America's warriors are fighting a two-fronted war that they never knew they'd be fighting. They face a savage enemy in Afghanistan, a primitive enemy made formidable by our rules of engagement and by our president in the White House. They face that enemy in Afghanistan, but the greatest killing field that our American warriors face today has been opened up in their rear in the continental United States by men and women who sit and have lunch and dinner over white linen tables and decide how our American warfighters will fight overseas, what they will and they won't do. Men and women who will never face this enemy face to face, who will never have a bullet whiz by their head and have to make the decision, was he shooting at me or not? Because I can only shoot if I can prove he was shooting at me and just not shooting over my head. They will never smell the stench of battle on the battlefield or never see the blood of their buddy on the ground. But they are making the rules and they're following a political agenda that is criminal. And today, instead of a jury trial by their peers, like you and I would get, they get a panel where an American warfighter has to prove himself innocent instead of them proving him guilty. And today, the American taxpayer, you, are financing both the war in Afghanistan that our warfighters are engaged in, and you're financing the enemy who is fighting against them. And this, folks, this is criminal. And if you don't believe it, you know it's true. Our president is going around American laws and financing Al-Qaeda in Syria. And just think about this today. Today, those weapons have a way that they can make it to the enemy in Afghanistan. We've lost in Syria. We've lost in Libya. We've lost in Iraq. We've lost in Afghanistan. Yet still American blood is being shed in Afghanistan. We've lost everywhere where President Obama has engaged or refused to engage us. And if you sat, as I did, back when the crisis was going on in Syria about the chemical weapons, and you watch TV, and you sit and you see President Obama on TV, and you see Secretary of State John Kerry on TV, who, by the way, compared our soldiers to Genghis Khan. If you saw them on TV, and you saw Vladimir Putin of Russia, and you found yourself like me, thinking, I kind of believe Putin more. That's funny, but it's serious, folks. And today, if you're an ally of the United States of America, how much faith do you have in America? I don't know how weak we are. I can't tell. I'm just a citizen, but I can tell you one thing. There's a perception around the world that America is weak. And all that does is cause chaos. Just the perception of weakness by the superpower makes the other people scramble. And today, if you're an ally of America, how much faith do you have in America when you can sit and see how we forsake our own in Benghazi? What do you think they think about how we will protect them? I'll tell you, it's serious today, folks. And it's most serious, as Karen said, and y'all know it. Y'all know it. There are so many things wrong in our republic that we don't know which fire to fight. But I can tell you this. If we lose our military, and they're being beaten down morally, daily. If we lose them, the rest of it doesn't make any difference. I'm not trying to tell you that our cause is more important than any other cause. What I'm telling you is if we lose our military, we lose our republic. We lose our republic, folks. And the American citizen is the one who must stand and defend the defender. We're not counting on Congress. We are glad we're getting a hearing. You know why we're glad? because it puts it back into the eye of the American citizen once more. And the more it is in the eye of the citizen, the more that it will continue to make the citizen sick of what's going on and what's being allowed to go on with our warriors. Karen didn't give you any numbers. I want to tell you something. People can blame it on Bush if they want to. Well, I'll tell you this. Up until 2009, it took that long in Afghanistan to lose nearly 1,000 American warriors. In 2009, we implemented the winning the hearts and minds strategy in Afghanistan. It took 27 months to lose 1,000 more Americans. Secretary of Defense Gates came out with his book, here just recently. But from the time that he felt the way that he felt and he left, 850 more Americans died. Why didn't he come out earlier? Folks, we the American citizens must speak up and defend our defenders. Thank y'all.
We'll open up the question round.
Oh, good, thanks, John. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that moving speech. I want to know what's being extorted. Mission names have meaning. Sometimes they have double meanings. If you could find out who gave the name of that mission, you'll find out a lot more of what's going on.
Okay. But I don't. You're talking about extortion.
Extortion.
Okay, extortion 17 is the call sign of the chopper. Okay, there were two choppers. One didn't go in. Extortion 16 and 17. Those were the call signs of those choppers from a long time ago. On and on, So I can't answer that. The name of the op that night was Operation Let Thee Grow, and that was Operation Let Thee Grow. That was a name that they gave to the target, to the Taliban target they were going after, and his name was Fareed Tahir. That's all I can tell you.
Is it true they never recovered the black box from the chopper?
Well, it's either they lied about it or it's true. One word that now. Here again, there's another thing that leads to another question, because in the testimony, the guy says we couldn't find the black box. Oh, actually, we couldn't get down to where the black box was that night because it was too hot. When we came back, a flood, when we were able to get back in, a flood had come in the wadi bed, and we couldn't find the black box. Now, Brigadier General Jeffrey Colt says in there, I believe in Exhibit 55 or 65, that he's talking to somebody else, and he says, this chopper didn't have a black box on it. We need to make sure but if it didn't, there again, it's just how old it was. Now, so there are two stories about that. Now, I'm told, I'm sure you military guys know, if that black box was lost, they can find it, because it puts a ping out, even if it's covered by, several feet of mud. So.
Wait, we've got a microphone for the question.
Yeah, if you would line up, if you have questions, if you'd go around right now and get and line up, that'll be a little easier so your voice is projected. Thanks.
Could you give us a sound check on this?
Check. Yep, got it down. First of all, Billy and Karen, thank you for coming here. This is, as far as I'm concerned anyway, I'm prior Navy. During the Vietnam era, I didn't see combat. But a couple things I wanted to bring up. First of all, I've been following the two of you ever since this happened. And I really thank you for your courage, for coming out and doing what you're doing. It takes a tremendous amount of courage having lost your child. Billy, I thought I heard you say at one of the interviews that, and you were very emotional at the time, but that when the chopper came down, that your son was still alive. That wasn't true then.
You
may
have heard Charlie Strange say that.
Charlie Strange.
Okay, somebody said
that.
Yeah, some of the men were thrown out of the chopper, and Charlie, by a picture he got of his son's autopsy, he concluded that possibly Michael was still alive when he hit the ground. But there's really no other evidence. That was Michael Strange. That was Charlie.
I've been running around my state of New Hampshire, speaking about Benghazi. I know what happened in Benghazi. It's easily found. You didn't address a lot of it. You're here for your son. But people need to understand the insidiousness of this administration. Because, folks, what you don't know is that Benghazi was supposed to have been an abduction. It was a setup. Okay, and we're talking about the Muslim Brotherhood. That's exactly where we're coming from here. Well, Morsi is buddies with Barack Obama. And he wanted the blind sheikh released. Obama wasn't going to do that. So the big October surprise was supposed to be this planned abduction of Ambassador Stevens and then a prisoner swap just before the election. That's why you're not hearing anything, and that's what's going on. And this is the insidiousness of this administration. I so sympathize with these folks because so many of our special ops troopers are dying needlessly, in my personal view. And I'm a military guy, and I'm saying, it's time to bring them to hell home. Okay, I'm sick and tired of losing people to fratricide and people that are put in harm's way with the people that they have actually trained, the Afghan army and some of the police, and being shot in the back. And I know that factually too because I know a combat nurse who's a friend of mine and told me about it.
I want to tell you that a recently retired, not retired, but a man who left SEAL Team 6 just 3 years short of retirement told us that he did that. And you know, you realize this too. These guys, when they get 17 years in, they're lifers. I mean, they joined to fight as a Navy SEAL. It's really a big deal when a guy leaves at 17 years. You who know this, you know, because 20 years is retirement, because you lose every benefit, you know, that you would have had. And he told us, he said, I had to get out. I mean, this is not a kid who had a desk job who accidentally ended up in a war zone. This is a guy who'd been fighting as a Navy SEAL for 17 years. And he said, I had to get out. He said, we tried to explain to our leaders that about the ideology that of the people we're working with in Afghanistan, and they told us we were illogical. And he said they were our greatest fear on every op was being shot in the back of the head by the Afghan working alongside us. And he said there were constant Mexican standoffs. And this is what's going on in our war zones. And we are, and you know, usually I talk about rules of engagement, but I just want to tell you 2 other stories. Well, I've had a mother reach out to me whose son was shot and this is all about appeasement. This is all about Islamic appeasement. Don't mistake any of this. This is what's going on here. And it does have something to do with who's in our White House. That cannot be denied. But so what happened is her son was on a base, and of course we're unarmed on our bases, but the Afghans that are on our bases are not unarmed. And they allowed an Afghan military guy to man the watchtower on our base, and he opened fire on our men below in the courtyard and killed 2. Her son literally strangled to death on his own blood because nobody could get to him to save his life because they couldn't get the guy out of the tower. We've got another friend. You know, these friends now are tragic friends, but we've got another friend whose son was killed while he was lifting weights. You know, you might have heard of that story because there's a big
area.
Mark Dakota.
Greg Buckley.
Greg Buckley Jr. is the one I'm talking about. And there were 2 other men with him. 3 of them were killed and another was seriously wounded. And there were 2 other men, and that was an insider attack by a T-boy who nothing has happened to him or the police chief he worked with yet, but he was using the police chief's gun. Big, long story. But, you know, and then we just hear these. We had an Army Ranger come to us not long after the press conference last May and said basically the same thing. I had to get out. I had a wife and children. He was actually on the cleanup crew on our son's crash. And then not long after that, shoot down, and then not long after that, he lost his best friend in a raid where his friend's unit had come under attack by some members of the Taliban. The Taliban realized they were outnumbered and started running, retreating, and as his unit followed them, just think about this. They had to call command and request permission to fire on them. And they were denied. And as he's arguing with his commander back at the base, he's shot in the head and killed. This is why we say, we're not talking about war. We're talking about constant murder at the hands of the U.S. government, in the hands of senior military leadership who will not address.
Even on the night that Aaron was killed and these guys were killed, the AC-130 Spectre in the air asked twice to engage enemy on the ground. And the air commander's testimony, 0% CDE. You military guys know that means 0% civilian damage estimate. And he was denied. And let me tell y'all something else. I don't want to talk too much, but you know last week, 65 Taliban prisoners released. A quarter of them with American blood on their hands. At least a quarter of them with American blood on their hands.
Probably all.
Over half of them had explosive residue on them when they were captured. Now, here's the thing. Here's the thing to me that just burns me up. Because we have American men who are going out and capturing these people. Maybe they ought to be killing all of them. Because our government is not going to do what they need to do. Our government will quickly, as I said, they will quickly bring American warriors to justice. Clint Lawrence, 20 years in prison. An American in Afghanistan who violated, they say, the rules of engagement. They say he violated, but he saved his men's lives by firing on the Taliban on the motorcycles when they refused to stop as they were asked to do. But our American government will prosecute him and put him in the pen. But our American government will allow 65 Taliban prisoners to be released, walk free, and listen to this, furnished with clothes, food, and cash
From the government.
from the American taxpayer as they walk out. Men who will go back on the battlefield, men who Karzai will say in the face of Barack Obama, we're releasing these men. We knew it for over a month. We knew it for a lot longer than that he was threatening to release them. Why? I want to know why that we didn't send a man into Karzai and say, we put you in, we'll take you out tomorrow. If those guys go free, you're out the next day. We are not respected anywhere in the world anymore. That's what should have happened. Those guys, and another thing, why do they even get a trial by jury? They are enemy combatants, not fighting under the flag of any nation, not fighting for any government. They don't have any rights by the Geneva Convention. Yet we elevate their status to the rights of practically an American citizen.
Is there a question here?
Thanks. I was just wondering if you have any information about whether it's usual for there to be such a high concentration of these elite warriors in a single transport helicopter like this. I would have thought they would have protected them by using multiple transport.
Good question, and I'm going to tell you the answer that we have to that. And it's actually two answers, okay? Because as I told you, there was a 3.5-hour firefight underway. When Admiral McCraven came to our house, he said, you're wrong. The firefight was over. The Rangers were in the questioning stage of the yacht. There was no firefight. There was no thought to be no danger. However, a Ranger told me, who was in the Advanced Operating Center, that when the chopper was shot down, the Rangers on the ground were still taking fire. The second thing is yes, many have asked that question. We've talked to an intelligence guy who was in theater that night. He said that he had conversation with some of the SEALs before they got on the chopper. He said it was a decision the SEALs made because the information, the intel they had about the landing zone, and this is the kind of guys they are, that the landing zone was so hot. You heard me mention Extortion 16 a while ago. The landing zone was so hot, they believed the second chopper would never make it to the ground, so they all got on one chopper. Now, this is who the SEALs are. This is who our warfighters are. That's the kind of risk they take. And when you got men who take those kind of risks, you need to make doggone sure that they've got the best choppers to do this. See, because if they've been on an MH-47, see, they'd have gone in single-handed, dark and hot. The CH-47 has to have their area lit up. They're supposed to have escorts. They have to and this is from the testimony. But we didn't have a chopper available for them. You couldn't have kept my son off that chopper or any of the rest of those SEALs if they'd known that their guys, that their buddies were in danger. That's who they are. They'd have gone in that night with a fingernail file and an ice pick if they'd had to. But I'll tell you what, they'd have been better off. Because they'd have been on foot and their training would have got most of them out alive instead of being locked up in the back of that bus. Yes, ma'am.
I just had a question about those people that were missing. That traded off of the Afghans on that helicopter. What's your gut? I mean, we talked about this at the table the other night. What's your gut as far as who those Afghanis were?
We don't know. And speculation in our position is really dangerous because we can be discredited so quickly if we begin to speculate. But I will tell you this, there were unidentified pieces of metal in our son's body. Nobody's told us yet what those pieces of metal were, because everything in his body was identified meticulously, but there were four fragments of metal. And we also had a SEAL Team 6 guy say, you know, we told our leaders, one of these nights, one of those damn Afghans are gonna step on our chopper with a suicide bomb on. So that has been that has been one of the potential things of what happened, because there was, one thing that we've learned is that the first things you hear out are probably closest to the truth because they haven't been cleaned up yet. And I remember the day we got news, that Saturday, I remember watching, somebody flipped the news on and we were watching and they were talking about the Afghans were given a report of how the helicopter blew up into 3 separate pieces in the sky and came to the ground. Well, that never made sense to us in the report of what we got, because we were told that the RPG hit a blade on the rear rotor system, tore off 10.5 feet of it, which caused, the chopper to be destabilized, the blades collided, the back pylon ripped off, and the front pylon ripped off, and then it came down. No explosion, and then exploded like the sun on the ground. But the Afghans reported an explosion in the sky. So, I don't know, could that have been when the rotor blades hit the chopper? I'm sure they hit the chopper. I don't know. But there are unanswered questions about that. But it's just something, it's speculation. If that happened, I can guarantee you we will never know. But
let me say, there are people, educated military people. The guy you talked to today believes that something happened on that chopper before
yeah.
before it shot.
Whether it was a firefight, a suicide bomb, I don't know.
Tell us about home.
What's that?
Tell us about home.
Oh, this is in the book. When we were coming back from, we were taken to several memorials after Aaron died, and when we were on our way back from the last one, well, actually after his funeral, we were flying home, and I was sitting by the window, and it's hard to just jump into this, but you're kind of cruel to me. No, I'm teasing. I looked out the window and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I punched Billy and I said, "You got to see this." He looked out the window and there in the sky, in 4 huge clouds side by side, spelled out the word home. H-O-M and a small E kind of turned sideways. I can still vision it. It was just one of those God moments, Our granddaughter was sitting in her mother's lap on their ride home from the funeral, and she said, "I saw Uncle Aaron last night," and her mom, didn't know what to say and didn't want to ask any leading questions. She just wanted.
You need to give a little bit of background because she hadn't said anything.
She was only 3.
This is not the one that was at the casket. This is the little one.
Yeah, little one was only 3 and hadn't said a word about Aaron since the death 3 weeks earlier. The funeral was 3 weeks after he died and had not said a word about it. And so this was her first time to even mention his name after he died. And that's what she said. "I saw Uncle Aaron last night," just as a matter of fact as she could. And her mother, our daughter, Tara, said, "Well, where?" And she goes, "Well, in heaven." And a few minutes went by and Tara, was trying to compose herself and figure out what to say. And she said, "Well, what was he doing?" And she said, "He was riding a horse." And then Lila, it's her name, she was sitting there and Tara was looking out the window of the airplane crying, and Lila said, "He's just fine, Mom." So it's just those things, come from God, and we know He is. We know where He is. We know where He was. We know that before He drew His last breath here on earth, He was in the arms of His Savior. We know that. It doesn't make it any easier, but we know that. So, other questions?
I just have a question. Will you be able to give your testimony? Are you just going to sit there and ask questions? Are they going to let
This is really interesting. This is something that we're going to be able to submit written questions.
That's it?
She asked if we were going to be able to share our testimony. They have chosen 2 or 3 families who will get to actually speak, and we're not one of them. Go figure. And neither is Charlie Strange, who, our 2 families have been pretty much the only ones who have, stuck our necks out on the line and demanded for this hearing, but we won't get to speak. And we do get to submit questions, but the congressmen get to decide which questions they'll ask the Pentagon.
What would you have us do now when we leave?
Well, right
Maybe
now,
especially the Act for America people, we've got a network of people.
the most important thing you could do today is call the members of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee and demand that they ask the hard questions. Because what I'm afraid this is going to turn into, and Billy told you I just watched the Tillman story and I had never watched it, but what they said in there was that basically the people doing the questioning didn't have enough information about the case to even ask educated questions. So it was pretty much just everybody patting each other on the back, the congressmen and the high-level military leaders. And I'm afraid that's what's going to happen here because nobody wants to ruffle feathers between. And Chavis has already come out and said, we're not going to do anything to embarrass the members of the Department of Defense or the Pentagon. And so to me, all that's saying is, don't worry, guys, we're not going to be hard on you. So I would like to say, you know, look, it's really easy to find the members. Darrell Lice is the chairman of it, and you can go right on House Oversight and Government Reform, and it'll list every member on the committee. And I would say,